The air is stuffy, and conversation is next to impossible. The factory room houses rows upon rows of knitting machines, each emitting a consistent, almost rhythmic sound. It's also loud, really loud. Just outside the factory site, though, the surrounding town is quiet. So quiet, you can hear the faint sound of intermittent rain sprinkling the lush greenery. It's not the kind of place you would go if your experience of Japan is defined and biased by the big city bustle of Tokyo or Osaka. Kamitonda, on the other hand, is a town in the textile production-heavy Wakayama Prefecture in western Japan. Its population, which is just shy of 15,000, hasn't grown much in the last 50 years. It's the kind of place most kids might want to leave for greener pastures once they finish school. But no one would have guessed a textile mill is influencing the world of apparel through its fabrics in this sleepy little manufacturing town. We sure didn't. For more than 80 years, Yamayo Textile has been the cornerstone of the town, and as we soon found out, the world of sportswear. We had the chance to visit Kamitonda on another project, but what we came away with was a very personal sense of intrigue and awe. We were there to capture the factory and do some interviews, straightforward enough, and the location was to be in Japan, which is always a bonus. Now, part of the production involved covering the factory where the fabrics going into this collection, as well as many best-selling Adidas items, were made. So when we first heard the name of the town, we were totally caught off guard. For some of the team, they'd never been to Japan, and even the ones that did had never been to the countryside. We could say the visit was long overdue. By visiting the mill, we had stumbled upon a story that was much deeper than we had first thought, and it gave us a vastly different perspective in how ideas come to life. First off, a bit of history. The mill was founded in 1934, producing French terry knit innerwear. A few years later, like many factories of the period, it would lend its manufacturing capacities to the war effort. Following the war, it returned to its original production focus. It would continue to produce variations of knitwear until Adidas made its formal entry into Japan in 1965. Yamashita-san, Yamayo's president of 25 years, recounted the arrival of Adidas in Japan and the German sportswear giant's influence on the domestic sportswear industry. Adidas entered the Japanese market in 1965. Before that, Japan's sportswear consisted of plain white shirts and pants. Japan's uniforms at the 1964 Tokyo Olympics were this way. It was when they arrived that the market for color sportswear in Japan really began. It certainly seemed to be more than just about putting in the time and keeping things simple. It was just as much about playing your cards right and earning respect with the right people, as Yamayo certainly did at the time. From there, the relationship between Yamayo and Adidas would only deepen. As Adidas grew, so did Yamayo. Yamashita-san's fabrics made their way into 4 items that sold over 1 million units in Japan. Each accomplishment allowed the mill to expand its production capabilities and enter a new phase of innovation and development alongside Adidas. And most crucially, one of the items to hit that mark wasn't just a bestseller, it was a lifesaver. Yamayo also handles many different fiber types beyond the cotton that the region is known for growing. These include oil-based synthetic fibers like polyester. In 1974, the world experienced the oil shock. The price of raw materials inflated, and things became very expensive. Then the next year, it dropped suddenly. At that time, this company went into the red. It was a very troubling time. This sudden deficit had crippled the company. But by chance in 1975, Adidas released a special edition top in honor of German football star Franz Beckenbauer. The Beckenbauer model track top became a hit when it exploded in popularity. In 2 years, that $2.4 million deficit disappeared. There's history like that at this company. So whatever Yamayo and Adidas do, that's where we started from. The Adidas-Yamayo relationship keeps the mill humming along year-round, but trust is a two-way street, and Yamayo has kept up their end over the years. First, Adidas was often the first to know about its newly developed fabrics, which gave it the first choice of usage. Second, Yamayo's other mill in Wakayama City is huddled close to competing mills, making it difficult to keep new developments a secret. Yamayo's Kamitonda mill, on the other hand, is comparatively secluded, meaning that the process behind fabrics made for Adidas remains a secret. And these fabrics are certainly not your low-quality variations that are rampant in fast fashion. Given its long history and competition with other big sports brands, Adidas is constantly pushing the technical demand of its fabrics, many of which you could argue only Yamayo can produce. So what makes Yamayo so special that Adidas would call on it for its latest collection? It's important to mention that it predominantly knits fabrics using circular knitting, which typically produces lighter, thinner fabrics in a tubular shape. Think the fabric in a t-shirt. Flat knitting, on the other hand, produces flat sheets of heavier fabric, like in a sweatshirt. While circular knitting isn't as fast or as efficient as flat knitting, what sets Yamayo apart in particular is that its workers regularly tinker and tweak their machines with custom-made parts to produce different knits. It's important to mention that it predominantly knits fabrics using circular knitting, which typically produces thinner, lighter fabrics in a tubular shape. Think the fabric in a t-shirt. Flat knitting, on the other hand, produces flat sheets of heavier fabric, like in a sweatshirt. While circular knitting isn't as fast or efficient as flat knitting, what sets Yamayo apart in particular is that its workers regularly tinker and tweak their machines with custom-made parts to produce different knits. This ability to specialize in mastering one style of production is essential. This way, Yamayo can be forward-thinking, especially when its client keeps cooking up all kinds of technically demanding recipes in Little Herzogenaurach, the small German town where Adidas is headquartered. So, where are we going with this? What does it matter that a German sportswear giant and a meticulous Japanese fabric mill are partnered and are both succeeding? The answer becomes apparent when you take a look at one key variable: presence. Yamayo's success serves as an example of how a comparatively smaller creative enterprise, through the sheer quality of its product, can make an impact that's much larger than both its physical and digital footprint. Adidas is Adidas. Its ubiquity comes thanks to a driven promotional strategy that extends across all platforms. Its success over the last few years has come at the hands of various calculated moves that have translated into big wins. The introduction of the runaway best-selling cushioning Boost and a more entertainment-driven push with Kanye West has allowed Adidas and parts of the company, such as Adidas Originals, to embed itself and remain relevant in popular culture, all while managing to retain its sporting heritage. Yamayo, on the other hand, is just the factory that makes fabric for them. It has no need for Facebook or Instagram, and you might chuckle at its very, very pre-Web 2.0 looking webpage. But by walking through its office, complete with wooden walls and desks cluttered with documents, and its factory filled with rows of yarn racks, knitting machines, and technicians hard at work, it suddenly makes sense. What we were looking at was further proof that this way of doing things, the old school do it right even if you don't do it fast way, was still very much alive and still very relevant. And it isn't simply because the past decade has seen the explosion of a demand for all things handmade, artisanal, or vintage. Yes, some brands have leveraged this sudden renewed value placed on heritage to market a supposed unbeatable quality. But once you look past the Instagram filters and retro logos painstakingly made in Illustrator, the result remains inauthentic. It's not about these labels founded in the 2010s and steeped in history. It's about the ones that actually let their work do all the talking and that leave the social media to the kids. The fact that Yamayo exists and is still doing things comparatively old-fashioned is both surprising and not. For North Americans, the surprise recalls Christopher Payne's urgent attempt to document the last surviving fabric mills in America, which largely disappeared as the country's manufacturing moved overseas. These kinds of factories are just not what we expect when we think about how stuff gets made. However, if you spend enough time in Japan and other parts of the old world, sites like these don't seem that far off. Japan retains a lot of its craftsmanship heritage, and people the world over have noticed. Kitchen knives, lacquerware, and of course food are all coveted items. There's a common thread between many traditional craftspeople. Choose one craft and spend an eternity mastering it. Jiro, the 90-something-year-old sushi chef and star of his own cult documentary, is a comparison used quite often. But his story, distributed globally in an internet era, enabled the rest of the world to understand this uniquely Japanese passion. Jiro's story is not unique. He falls into a long list of masters, the ones who haven't caught up with the times and perhaps don't need or want to. By focusing on doing one thing well, such that the end work becomes someone's go-to when they think of a knife, food, or fabric, it seems that the quality and popularity it generates are all that's needed to create tangible success. In Yamayo's case, the metrics it prizes aren't likes, shares, or engagement, but understandably, sales. Yamashita-san counts one of his life's greatest achievements as having worked at a factory that produced 4 bestsellers. The first was the aforementioned Franz Beckenbauer track top. The second was a crewneck sweatshirt, and the third and fourth were both kits for the Japanese national soccer team. At the time, each of those people buying and wearing those items likely didn't know much about the origins beyond made in Japan, but those who buy them this time definitely will. The mill will be revealed as an Adidas partner for the first time after all these years. Each item from the new collection will have that Yamayo tag stitched into it, which in turn makes it onto someone's back somewhere in the world. And once they take notice of how that fabric somehow feels different against their skin, they might do a search for that mill, and they'll finally know about the small but incredible operation churning out some of the world's best fabrics in a quiet, sleepy Japanese town called Kamitonda.